Heartbroken girl rushes into marriage with a stranger, only to discover he's a billionaire. Part 2. Hello, my beautiful story family. Welcome back to our channel. I've missed you all so much since sharing part 1 of Olivia and Jackson's emotional journey. Your comments on the last video absolutely blew me away. Reading your thoughts, predictions, and personal connections to this story has been the highlight of my week. For those wondering, yes, I read every single comment. Those of you who shared your own experiences with whirlwind romances or discovering unexpected truths about partners, your vulnerability and honesty touched me deeply. And those heated debates about whether Olivia should stay or go. They show just how invested you've become in this story. Before we continue, if you're new here or somehow stumbled upon part 2 without seeing the beginning, you'll want to click away right now and watch part 1 first. I've linked it in the description and pinned it in the comments. Trust me, you'll want the full emotional experience of Olivia's journey from heartbreak to her impulsive decision to marry Jackson, only to discover his billionaire identity. For my returning story family members, thank you for coming back. Your support through likes, shares, and those thoughtful comments is what keeps me creating these stories. Each time you engage, you're helping our community grow, and I'm eternally grateful. Today, we're diving straight back into Heartbroken girl rushes into marriage with a stranger, only to discover he's a billionaire. When we left off, Olivia had just experienced the chilly reception of Jackson's intimidating family, leaving her questioning everything about her hasty decision. As we rejoin Olivia and Jackson, their relationship faces new challenges: isolation, judgment, and growing doubt. Will their genuine connection survive the mounting pressure? Has Olivia jumped from one painful situation directly into another? Or will unexpected revelations change everything once again? Grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's continue this emotional journey together. I promise, what happens next will have you on the edge of your seat. 2 weeks after the disastrous family lunch, Jackson announced they would host a dinner party, just a few close friends and business associates. Nothing formal. Olivia soon discovered that nothing formal in Blackwood terms meant a catered 7-course meal for 16 guests, served by uniformed staff in their penthouse dining room. Wear something elegant but not overstated, Jackson suggested, as though this guidance was perfectly clear. These are important connections. The guest list revealed the evening's true purpose: an introduction of Jackson's new wife to his social circle. Among the attendees, 2 bank executives, a prominent real estate developer, 3 board members from the Blackwood Foundation, a state senator and his wife, and the editor-in-chief of Boston's premier lifestyle magazine. Olivia spent hours preparing, acutely aware of the scrutiny she would face. She finally selected a black sheath dress, simple but sophisticated, hoping it struck the right balance between elegance and authenticity. As guests arrived, Olivia found herself constantly performing, smiling appropriately, remembering names and connections, offering the right pleasantries at the right moments. Each introduction came with subtle assessment, curious glances that measured her suitability. "So you're the artist who captured our Jackson," said Eleanor Winthrop, whose family had apparently summered alongside the Blackwoods for generations. How refreshing to have someone creative join the circle. At dinner, Olivia was seated between the bank president and the magazine editor, a strategic placement that quickly revealed itself as an interview rather than casual conversation. "Will you continue your artistic career now that you've married into the Blackwood family?" the editor inquired, somehow making the question sound both innocent and loaded. "Of course she will," Jackson answered from across the table before Olivia could respond. Though perhaps with a shift in focus. "We've discussed the possibility of her designing the new Blackwood Children's Wing at Mass General." This was news to Olivia. No such discussion had occurred. Conversations flowed around her, filled with references to people and events she didn't know, charity galas from previous seasons, private club memberships, shared vacations in exclusive locations. Each exchange emphasized her outsider status. Harvard Club or Somerset for lunch next week? Someone asked Jackson casually. The foundation quarterly projections look strong, mentioned another guest. How is the campaign coming along? Questioned the senator with a meaningful glance. Olivia realized these weren't merely social connections, but an intricate network of power and influence, one she was expected to navigate despite having no map or guide. As the evening progressed, she retreated into observation mode, watching Jackson move effortlessly through this world, charming, authoritative, completely in his element. This version of her husband, the polished, strategic Blackwood heir, seemed like yet another stranger. After the dinner party, while the last guests lingered over digestives in the living room, Olivia slipped away to the kitchen, seeking a moment's respite from the performance. She stood by the window, watching the city lights below, when voices drifted in from the adjacent butler's pantry. "Victoria, I appreciate your concern, but my marriage is not up for discussion." Jackson's voice, tense with controlled frustration. "Don't be naive, darling." Victoria's crisp tones carried clearly. "This hasty union puts everything at risk: the succession plan, the foundation governance, the Harrington merger negotiations. Those things have nothing to do with Olivia." "They have everything to do with your choice of wife," Victoria countered. The board members were watching her every move tonight. "What do you think Conrad Winthrop thought when she couldn't name a single major donor to last year's hospital benefit?" "She's been in this world for 3 weeks," Jackson defended. "Precisely my point. This marriage was a mistake, an impulsive decision that needs to be rectified before permanent damage occurs." Olivia pressed her back against the wall, heart pounding as Victoria continued. "She's completely unprepared for this position. No connections, no understanding of our world, no concept of the responsibilities you bear. Your father and I have discussed this at length. We believe a quiet annulment would be best. We can position it sympathetically in the press. No one need be embarrassed." "There will be no annulment," Jackson stated firmly. "I married Olivia because you were rebelling," Victoria interrupted. "Just like the architecture firm, just like declining the board chairmanship. You've spent your entire adult life trying to escape your responsibilities. That's not fair." "Fair?" "What's not fair is bringing that young woman into a situation she cannot possibly navigate successfully. She will never be accepted in our circles, Jackson. You know this. The kindest thing would be to end this before deeper attachments form." Silence fell, and Olivia held her breath, waiting for Jackson's response, his defense, his rejection of his mother's manipulation. Instead, his voice came softer, uncertain. "I need time, Mother. Give us a chance to make this work. Not a definitive rejection. Not an absolute defense. Just a request for time, leaving open the possibility that Victoria might be right." Olivia slipped away before they could discover her presence, retreating to her room with the devastating knowledge that her marriage was being discussed as a temporary mistake rather than a permanent commitment. Over the following weeks, a subtle but unmistakable distance grew between Olivia and Jackson. Their conversations remained polite, sometimes even warm, but something fundamental had shifted. Topics of substance were replaced by logistical discussions and surface pleasantries. "The Andersons invited us for dinner next Thursday," Jackson would say over breakfast. "I'll check my schedule," Olivia would reply, though they both knew she had no competing obligations. They occupied the same physical space while existing in completely different emotional realms. Jackson seemed increasingly preoccupied, checking his phone constantly, making calls from his office with the door closed. Olivia found herself retreating to her makeshift studio, a converted sunroom she'd claimed as her creative space. Her attempts to bridge the growing gap met with pleasant but distracted responses. "Should we talk about what happened at the dinner party?" she ventured one evening. "Nothing happened," Jackson replied, not looking up from his laptop. "It went well. Everyone was impressed by you." The platitude highlighted their disconnection, his inability or unwillingness to acknowledge the obvious tensions and challenges. When she suggested they take a weekend away, just the two of us, somewhere simple, Jackson agreed enthusiastically but then cancelled 2 days before, citing unavoidable foundation business. The physical aspect of their relationship had stalled completely. What had begun as mutual respect for boundaries now felt like active avoidance. Jackson no longer reached for her hand, no longer offered casual affection. Their goodnight kisses had become perfunctory when they happened at all. Social events, of which there were many, found them playing the roles of devoted couple while maintaining careful distance. They arrived together, circulated separately, and departed with practiced smiles that revealed nothing of their private reality. The Winthrops mentioned their summer house in Nantucket, Jackson would report. "We should consider joining them for the 4th. Plans for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain, events scheduled months ahead while they struggled to connect in the present moment. Olivia found herself missing not just emotional intimacy but basic companionship. The whirlwind connection that had prompted their impulsive marriage had evaporated, replaced by cordial coexistence between virtual strangers. "Are you happy?" she asked directly one night as they prepared for another social obligation. Jackson looked genuinely surprised by the question. "Of course. Aren't you?" The disconnect between his automatic response and their lived reality revealed just how far apart they drifted, how effectively they'd both begun pretending their marriage was something it wasn't. Jackson's work hours grew increasingly extended. What began as occasional late nights became a consistent pattern, leaving before Olivia woke, returning after she'd gone to bed. Entire days passed without meaningful interaction. "The Harrington acquisition is at a critical stage," he explained when she finally confronted him about his absence. "The negotiations require my personal attention." "Every night? Every weekend?" "It's temporary," he assured her. "Just until the deal closes." But as weeks passed, new priorities replaced the Harrington deal: foundation events, board meetings, client dinners, strategy sessions. The specific justifications changed while the pattern remained consistent: Jackson's physical and emotional absence from their marriage. Left alone in the vast penthouse, Olivia attempted to establish some semblance of normal life. She explored Boston's museums and parks, began sketching again, even tried connecting with several artist communities. But without Jackson's presence, the city remained stubbornly foreign, unwelcoming. The staff, ever present but distant, made her solitude more pronounced rather than less. Their practiced deference emphasized her strange position, technically the lady of the house, practically a glorified guest. "Will Mr. Blackwood be joining you for dinner, madam?" Chef Antoine would ask each evening, though they both knew the answer. "Not tonight," she would reply, declining his offer of an elaborate meal for one. The penthouse itself seemed to grow larger in Jackson's absence, cavernous rooms filled with expensive furnishings but devoid of warmth or personality. Olivia wandered through spaces that technically belonged to her but never felt like home: the formal living room with its museum-quality art, the media room she never used, the gym with equipment she didn't understand. At night, the floor-to-ceiling windows offered spectacular views of Boston's glittering skyline, a city full of people connected to each other, while she remained isolated 30 floors above, surrounded by luxury but separated from authentic human contact. She began counting meaningful interactions, the barista who remembered her order, the gallery owner who recognized her name, the elderly woman who shared her bench in the public garden. These brief connections provided momentary relief from the growing sense of invisibility. Calls to her family became lifelines, though she carefully edited her experiences, unwilling to admit the extent of her loneliness. Her sister's concerned questions, "Are you happy, Liv? Really happy?" were deflected with vague assurances. One rainy Tuesday, Olivia realized she hadn't spoken aloud to another person in nearly 3 days, despite living in a household with staff. The revelation hit with stunning force. She had married to escape isolation after Michael's betrayal, only to find herself more profoundly alone than ever before. After 3 weeks of rattling around the enormous penthouse alone, Olivia began systematically exploring rooms she'd previously avoided. The East Wing, a section Jackson had described only as storage and mechanical spaces, contained several locked doors that piqued her curiosity. On a particularly lonely Tuesday afternoon, she discovered a key ring in Jackson's desk drawer while searching for stationery. 20 minutes of trial and error led her to a heavy oak door at the end of a seldom-used corridor. The brass key turned smoothly, revealing a space that took her breath away. Sunlight streamed through north-facing skylights, illuminating a fully equipped art studio that rivaled professional spaces she'd coveted in New York. Easels of various sizes stood positioned for optimal light. Storage cabinets lined one wall, their glass fronts revealing supplies organized with meticulous care, brushes arranged by size and type, paints grouped by brand and color spectrum, canvases stacked by dimension. A ventilation system hummed quietly, keeping the air fresh despite the lingering scent of oils and turpentine. A sink with specialized drainage for art materials occupied one corner. Music equipment, speakers and a high-end sound system suggested this was a space designed for extended creative sessions. Most telling was the worn leather chair positioned before the main easel, its cushions compressed from years of use, its armrests bearing the patina of countless hours of occupation. This wasn't a showroom or vanity space. This was a working studio, lovingly assembled and regularly used. Someone spent significant time here, and given the locked door and Jackson's dismissive description, that someone clearly wanted the space kept secret. Drawn deeper into the studio, Olivia discovered a large flat file cabinet against the far wall. She hesitated briefly before sliding open the top drawer, revealing expertly organized portfolios labeled by year. The most recent, dated just 3 months ago, contained detailed architectural sketches, renderings more artistic than technical, buildings imagined as living entities rather than mere structures. Behind a Japanese folding screen in the corner, she found them, canvases stored vertically on specialized racks, at least 30 finished works. With careful hands, she slid the first one out and nearly gasped aloud. The painting, a moody urban landscape viewed from above, displayed extraordinary technical skill. Precise brushwork captured city lights reflecting on wet pavement, creating an atmosphere both melancholy and beautiful. The perspective suggested a viewer separated from the scene below, observing but not participating. One by one, she examined the canvases. Each revealed astonishing talent and a distinctive style that blended technical precision with emotional depth. A series depicting solitary figures in crowded spaces. Architectural studies that transform buildings into metaphors. Interior scenes filled with significant objects, but devoid of people. The evolution was clear across the chronologically arranged works: growing confidence, developing technique, a voice becoming increasingly distinctive and assured. The most recent pieces showed a maturity that stunned her professional eye. These weren't the works of a talented amateur, but of a serious artist who had dedicated thousands of hours to his craft. One signature in the corner of each canvas confirmed what she'd already realized: J.R.B. Jackson. Reed Blackwood. The man she'd married possessed extraordinary artistic talent he had apparently never shared with the world or with his family. Olivia was still in the studio when Jackson returned home that evening, earlier than usual. He froze in the doorway, his briefcase dropping from suddenly limp fingers. "You found it," he said quietly, no anger in his voice, only resignation and something that might have been relief. "Why didn't you tell me?" Olivia gestured toward the paintings. "These are extraordinary, Jackson." He moved into the room slowly, as though entering sacred space. "It never seemed relevant." "Not relevant?" "You're incredibly talented. These works, they're museum quality." Jackson ran his fingers along an easel, a gesture both familiar and wistful. "I wanted to be an artist. From the time I was 12, it was all I cared about." He crossed to the storage cabinet, unlocking a lower drawer she hadn't explored. From it, he withdrew a thick portfolio and handed it to her. Inside were newspaper clippings, program booklets, photographs, documentation of a young artist's early success. "Regional competitions, student exhibitions," he explained. "I was accepted to RISD with a partial scholarship." The portfolio contained acceptance letters from prestigious art programs, RISD, Pratt, SAIC, alongside glowing recommendations from instructors. The final page was a framed newspaper article: "Young Blackwood wins National Student Prize." "What happened?" Olivia asked softly. Jackson's expression tightened. "My father informed me that Blackwoods aren't artists. We're businessmen, civic leaders, responsible stewards of family legacy." His voice took on a mocking quality, clearly mimicking Raymond's tone. "Art is a respectable hobby, son, not a profession for someone of your position." So architecture became the compromise. Exactly. Creative enough to satisfy something in me, practical enough to qualify as a real profession. Father called it channeling artistic tendencies toward productive application. The studio suddenly made perfect sense, a secret space where dreams weren't quite abandoned, just hidden from disapproving eyes. They sat cross-legged on the studio floor, surrounded by Jackson's artwork, takeout containers from a nearby Thai restaurant scattered between them. For the first time since their wedding, conversation flowed without calculation or performance. "This one," Olivia said, pointing to a particularly striking cityscape, "your handling of light here reminds me of Hopper, that same sense of isolation within urban density." Jackson smiled, genuinely pleased by the comparison. "Hopper was my first love. I spent hours at the Whitney as a teenager, studying early Sunday morning until the guards got suspicious." "What were you looking for in it?" "The silence," he answered immediately. How he captured the weight of silence in a city that never stops moving. That contradiction fascinated me. Olivia nodded, understanding completely. "That's what I see in your work too, these moments of stillness carved out of chaos." They moved through his paintings chronologically, Olivia asking questions that no one had ever bothered to ask, Jackson answering with increasing animation. Technical discussions about brushwork and composition gave way to deeper conversations about intention and emotion. "This series," she observed, gesturing toward paintings of solitary figures, there's such longing here. Especially this one. The canvas showed a young man at a formal dinner, physically present but emotionally elsewhere, surrounded by elegant people who didn't see him. My 25th birthday, Jackson admitted. That was the night I realized I could be physically present in a room full of people who had known me my entire life, yet completely invisible to them. Because they see the Blackwood, not Jackson. Exactly. He looked at her with newfound appreciation. You understand. Olivia smiled ruefully. More than you know. In the art world, people often see the commodity, not the creator. The investment potential, not the human behind the work. Their experiences, though from vastly different worlds, shared a common thread, the struggle to be seen authentically rather than through the lens of external value. When I paint, Jackson said, gesturing toward an unfinished canvas on the easel, everything else falls away. Status, expectations, responsibilities, none of it exists. There's just the connection between what I see and what I create. That's why I couldn't stop, even after Michael's betrayal, Olivia replied. Creating was the only thing that still made sense when everything else collapsed. In that moment, something shifted between them, mutual recognition of shared passion, of common understanding despite their different backgrounds. For the first time, they weren't performative versions of themselves, but two artists talking about what mattered most. I've never discussed my work like this with anyone, Jackson admitted softly. Not even, he stopped himself. Not even who? Anyone, he repeated, though the hesitation suggested a specific person left unmentioned. As midnight approached, Jackson revealed deeper layers of his family dynamics. He stood before a large window, silhouetted against city lights, his reflection ghostly in the glass. My father built Blackwood Industries from regional player to national force, he explained. His father managed properties, mine constructed empires. The legacy weighs heavily on him. And on you, Olivia observed. Jackson nodded. When I was 16, I won a national competition. My painting was displayed at the Kennedy Center. Every major paper covered it, the Blackwood heir with unexpected talent. His voice tightened. That night, instead of congratulations, my father lectured me about the temporary distractions versus permanent responsibilities. He'd already mapped my entire future, Harvard business, then MBA, then progressive leadership roles within Blackwood Industries. What did you do? I fought back, initially. Refused Harvard, applied to art schools. That's when he threatened to cut all financial support. Jackson turned from the window. Not just for education, for everything. I'd be completely on my own at 18. That's manipulation, not parenting, Olivia said softly. To him, it was necessary course correction. Blackwoods don't become artists, we become leaders, builders, power brokers. End of discussion. Architecture became my compromise, Jackson continued, settling beside Olivia on the studio's worn leather sofa. Creative enough to feed something essential in me, practical enough to qualify as a respectable profession in my father's eyes. He gestured around the studio. This became my secret sanctuary. The family believes I merely dabble occasionally, a socially acceptable hobby, nothing serious. Your mother doesn't know about your talent? Jackson's laugh held no humor. She knows, but she's aligned with my father. Victoria Blackwood understands dynasty building. Personal fulfillment ranks far below duty on her priority list. Olivia thought about the life mapped out for Jackson from birth, the expectations, traditions, and responsibilities that had narrowed his choices to prescribed pathways. The Blackwood name opens doors, Jackson acknowledged, but it also functions as a cage. Every decision filtered through its impact on family reputation. Every relationship evaluated for strategic advantage. Including marriage, Olivia said quietly. Especially marriage. The right spouse solidifies business alliances, strengthens social position, produces suitable heirs. The centuries-old playbook never changes. He reached for her hand. That's why meeting you felt so revolutionary. You saw me without the Blackwood context. You responded to me, not my potential usefulness. And why your family sees me as completely unsuitable, Olivia added, understanding blooming. I bring no strategic advantages, no helpful connections. Exactly. You're my choice, not theirs, perhaps my first truly independent decision. Have there been others? Olivia asked, curiosity finally overcoming hesitation. Women your family approved of? Jackson nodded, his expression clouding. 3 serious relationships. All thoroughly vetted and enthusiastically endorsed by my parents. What happened? Allison Brady, Boston Brahmin, perfect pedigree. We dated through my final year at Harvard. She had our children's prep school selected before our 3rd date. His smile held no warmth. She wanted the Blackwood name, not the person carrying it. The second? Vanessa Harrington. Father was thrilled, the Harringtons own half of Vermont. When I discovered she was reporting our private conversations back to both our fathers to help with merger negotiations, I ended it. Olivia winced. And the third? Nicole Whitcomb. Genuinely kind person, actually. We dated for nearly 2 years. Jackson's voice softened. She tried to love me, tried to understand my passion for art and architecture. But ultimately, she couldn't separate the man from the institution. When she talked about our future, it was always in terms of my taking my rightful place in the family business. They all wanted the heir, not the man, Olivia summarized. Exactly. Each relationship failed for the same reason. They fell in love with the Blackwood package, complete with its wealth, status, and limitations. None of them ever really saw me. Something shifted in the studio's atmosphere as hours of conversation stripped away their carefully maintained facades. Dawn light began filtering through the skylights, casting soft illumination across their tired faces. I was so angry when I discovered who you really were, Olivia admitted, tucking her legs beneath her on the sofa. It felt like another deception after Michael. Jackson nodded. I should have told you sooner. I was just afraid that I'd become like the others, she finished for him. That I'd start seeing the inheritance instead of you. Yes. The simplicity of his response carried profound vulnerability. They sat in comfortable silence, studying each other with new understanding. Jackson's tie was long discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up revealing paint stains he'd never completely scrubbed away. Olivia's careful makeup had faded, her guard completely lowered. I see you now, she said softly. Not Jackson Blackwood, heir to billions. Not the architect with the perfect pedigree. Just Jackson, the artist who observes the world with such compassion. The man who notices how light changes everything. His eyes filled with unexpected emotion. And I see you, Olivia. Not the opportunity you represented or the rebellion you facilitated. I see the woman whose strength survived betrayal. Whose talent transforms pain into beauty? Whose courage brought her here despite every reason to run? For the first time since their hasty wedding, they truly looked at each other, not as symbols or solutions, but as complex, wounded, genuine human beings. As morning light strengthened through the skylights, they remained on the studio sofa, neither willing to break the newfound connection by returning to the formal portions of the penthouse. "I should show you something," Olivia said suddenly. She retrieved her bag from where she'd left it by the door and pulled out her sketchbook, the one constant companion throughout her tumultuous journey. She hesitated before handing it over. "No one's seen these. They're not finished works, just processing." Jackson accepted the book with evident understanding of what the gesture meant, an offering of trust, a revealing of her unfiltered self. He turned pages slowly, studying the raw emotional landscapes she'd created during her darkest days after Michael's betrayal, through her time in Connecticut, and into the confused early weeks of their marriage. "These are extraordinary," he said finally, his voice hushed with genuine admiration. "The honesty here, it's almost painful to witness. That's how I felt creating them." When he reached the most recent sketches, begun in this very penthouse, he paused on a particular drawing. It showed a woman standing alone before floor-to-ceiling windows, the city beyond rendered in minimal detail, while the reflected glass captured two distinct versions of her. "This is how you felt here," he realized. "Split between worlds, observed but unseen." Olivia nodded, moved by his perfect understanding of what she'd tried to express. Jackson closed the sketchbook carefully and returned it to her hands, his fingers lingering against hers. "Thank you for trusting me with these. Thank you for seeing them, really seeing them." The air between them changed, charged with recognition and possibility. Jackson reached up slowly, telegraphing his intention, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His hand gently cupped her cheek, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with wonder. "May I?" he whispered. Her answer came as she leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their lips met tentatively at first, a question rather than a claim. Unlike their courthouse kiss, perfunctory, performed for witnesses, this connection held genuine emotion. His hand slid into her hair as the kiss deepened, both of them surprised by the intensity that bloomed between them, almost like neither of them wanted it to end. When they finally separated, breathless and stunned, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "That felt like a first kiss," he murmured. "It was," Olivia replied with perfect understanding. "The first one that was really us." The genuine connection that sparked between them in the studio couldn't entirely eclipse the complicated reality surrounding their relationship. As they finally left the studio, reluctantly returning to the main living areas where staff had already begun their morning routines, the outside world reasserted itself. "Mr. Blackwood," his assistant called from the entryway, "your mother phoned twice. The foundation board meeting has been moved to 10. And Mr. Harrington expects your call regarding the acquisition terms." Jackson's posture shifted subtly, shoulders squaring, jaw tightening, as he stepped back into his public role. "Thank you, Rebecca. Please let them know I'll be ready." Olivia felt the invisible barriers reconstructing between them. The tenderness they'd shared felt suddenly fragile against the weight of expectations, obligations, and complications that defined their actual circumstances. "We got married without knowing each other," she said quietly when they were alone again. "Whatever we're feeling now doesn't change that fundamental truth." Jackson nodded slowly. "Or the fact that my family is actively working to end our marriage. Or that your life was destroyed by betrayal just months ago." or that we still have fundamental differences in background, experience, and expectations. The growing warmth between them now competed with practical reality, a hasty marriage built on impulse rather than foundation, powerful family opposition, recent emotional wounds still raw, and the question of whether genuine connection could retroactively justify a decision made for entirely different reasons. 6 weeks after their courthouse wedding, Olivia and Jackson had established a tentative but growing harmony. The discovery of Jackson's secret studio had marked a turning point, creating space for authentic connection that had been missing from their hasty marriage. Mornings now included coffee together before Jackson left for work. Evenings often found them in the studio, Jackson working on architectural renderings while Olivia developed a new series exploring themes of identity and perception. Weekends occasionally included outings to small galleries or quiet restaurants where they could continue getting to know each other without the pressure of the Blackwood social circle. "I'm thinking of renting studio space downtown," Olivia mentioned one evening as they prepared dinner together, a new ritual they'd established, dismissing the chef 2 nights weekly to cook for themselves. "You don't like the penthouse studio?" Jackson asked, looking up from chopping vegetables. "I love it," Olivia assured him. "But I need to restart my professional work, establish connections in the Boston art community. Having separate creative space might help me transition back into serious production." "That makes sense." These simple exchanges, supportive, respectful of individual needs while building shared understanding, had gradually replaced their earlier awkwardness. Physical intimacy had developed slowly but genuinely, built on growing emotional trust rather than obligation or expectation. While Victoria continued making disapproving comments and Raymond remained coldly formal, Olivia found herself increasingly able to navigate these challenges with Jackson's supportive presence. For the first time since their impulsive wedding, she felt cautiously optimistic about their future together. The annual Blackwood Foundation Gala represented Jackson's family at its most public and prestigious. Held at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, the event drew the city's elite, old money, new tech wealth, political power brokers, and cultural influencers gathered under crystal chandeliers to support children's education initiatives while cementing social connections. Olivia had prepared meticulously, selecting a midnight blue gown that balanced elegance with artistic sensibility. Jackson beamed with genuine pride as they entered together, his hand resting comfortably at the small of her back. "Jackson Blackwood," a melodic voice called from behind them as they navigated the cocktail hour. "I was hoping to see you tonight." They turned to face a striking woman in her early 30s, impeccably styled in designer evening wear that screamed old money restraint. Her smile revealed perfect teeth and absolutely no warmth. "Vanessa," Jackson replied, his body language instantly tense. "I didn't realize you were back from London. Daddy insisted I attend tonight. The Foundation's work is so important to our family." Her gaze shifted to Olivia, assessing everything from her dress to her posture in one comprehensive sweep. "And this must be the new Mrs. Blackwood. The artist, correct? We've all heard so much about your unexpected union." "Vanessa Harrington," she extended her hand. "Jackson and I were practically engaged before his little rebellious phase began. Victoria still reminds me what beautiful children we would have had." Vanessa maneuvered Olivia away from Jackson, linking their arms with false camaraderie as a waiter approached with champagne. "You must feel so overwhelmed by all this," she remarked, gesturing toward the glittering crowd. Jackson always did have a weakness for unconventional women, though they typically didn't make it past the 3-month mark. Olivia maintained her composure. "Jackson and I have discussed his past relationships." "Discussed?" How diplomatic. Vanessa laughed lightly. Did he mention our families have been planning our merger, personal and professional, since we were children? The Harrington-Blackwood alliance has been Raymond's priority for decades. She sipped her champagne delicately. Or perhaps he told you about his pattern. The rebellious choices that inevitably end with him returning to family expectations? The art school applications his father quashed? The backpacking year in Europe that lasted 3 weeks before the trust fund access was restricted? Vanessa's perfect smile never wavered. The Blackwoods have a particular method for handling Jackson's periodic attempts at independence. They allow the tantrum to run its course, then quietly clean up afterwards. Victoria already has the press statement drafted for your eventual separation, amicable parting, and different life directions feature prominently. Her voice dropped to a confidential whisper. They've simply never had to manage anything quite as dramatic as an impulsive marriage before. But rest assured, they're experts at damage control. But enough about predictable family dynamics. Vanessa continued, steering Olivia toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. I imagine you're more interested in Blackwood Industries' latest acquisition. It's been the talk of New York art circles for weeks. Something in her tone sent warning signals through Olivia's body. What acquisition? Porter Gallery, of course. Along with its subsidiary locations. Vanessa's expression registered perfect surprise. Surely Jackson mentioned it? The deal closes next week. Raymond has been personally handling the negotiations for months. Olivia felt the room tilt slightly. Blackwood is buying Porter Gallery? The entire chain. Michael Porter approached Raymond last quarter, seeking capital for expansion. Blackwood countered with an acquisition offer instead. Vanessa studied Olivia's face with evident satisfaction. Given your history with Porter, I assumed that's how you and Jackson connected. He was handling the preliminary assessment when you two met. The implications crashed through Olivia's mind. Porter Gallery, the business at the center of her betrayal, the subject of her ongoing lawsuit, the source of her professional heartbreak, was being acquired by her new husband's family. Of course, the lawsuit complicates matters, Vanessa added casually. But I understand the Blackwood legal team has developed quite the strategy for handling that particular nuisance. Something about questionable provenance documentation? Raymond seemed quite confident it would resolve favorably. Olivia moved through the remainder of the gala in a fog of disbelief and mounting horror. She accepted congratulations from strangers, posed for photos with Jackson, even managed appropriate small talk with Foundation board members, all while her mind raced through every interaction she'd had with Jackson, re-examining each moment through this devastating new lens. Their chance meeting in Connecticut. His immediate recognition of her work. The whirlwind romance and sudden proposal. His convenient vagueness about family business dealings. What if none of it had been chance? What if their entire relationship had been calculated, a strategic move to neutralize her lawsuit against Porter Gallery before the acquisition? The pieces aligned with sickening precision. Jackson had approached her exactly when the Porter acquisition was being negotiated. He'd pursued her with focused attention, proposed marriage with startling speed, all while his family was secretly maneuvering to acquire the very business that had destroyed her career. Worst of all, Jackson had never mentioned the acquisition, not once during their growing closeness, not even after they'd begun building genuine trust. Either he deliberately concealed information central to her life and career, or he'd been used as an unwitting pawn in his family's machinations. Either possibility felt unbearable. By the time they reached the penthouse, Olivia's shock had crystallized into cold certainty. She had been betrayed again, manipulated by people who viewed her not as a person but as a problem to be managed, an obstacle to be neutralized through whatever means necessary. Was anything real? She whispered as the elevator doors closed behind them. Or was I just a convenient solution to your family's legal complications? What are you talking about? Jackson asked, confusion evident in his expression as he loosened his tie. Blackwood Industries is buying Porter Gallery, Olivia stated flatly. The same gallery being sued by the artist you happened to meet, court, and marry in record time. Jackson froze. How did you? Vanessa was kind enough to fill me in. Apparently everyone knows except your wife. Olivia, I can explain. Explain what? That you deliberately pursued me while your family was negotiating to acquire the business that destroyed my career? That you've been hiding this massive conflict of interest for our entire relationship? Jackson reached for her hand, which she yanked away. I only learned about the acquisition last month. Father kept me out of those negotiations deliberately. And you didn't think to mention it? While we were sharing our deepest truths, building trust, you just forgot to mention your family is buying the company I'm suing? I was trying to find the right time. There is no right time to admit you're part of a family conspiring to crush my lawsuit. Olivia's voice rose. Vanessa says your legal team already has a strategy to discredit my claims. I wouldn't let that happen, Jackson insisted. You already have. By keeping me in the dark, by playing along with whatever scheme your family concocted. There was no scheme. Then explain why, of all the coffee shops in Connecticut, you happened to find me. Why, of all the women in the world, you proposed to me after 1 week. Was any of it real, Jackson? Or was I just collateral damage in another Blackwood business acquisition? Olivia moved through the bedroom with focused determination, yanking open drawers and pulling clothes from hangers. The expensive items she'd acquired since the wedding remained untouched. She wanted nothing from this life, nothing that could connect her to the Blackwoods or remind her of this second devastating betrayal. What are you doing? Jackson asked from the doorway, his voice tight with alarm. What does it look like? She stuffed her sketchbooks into a canvas bag, hands trembling with anger and hurt. I'm leaving. At midnight? Without even discussing this? We're well past discussion, Jackson. She zipped her suitcase with finality. I survived Michael's betrayal. I'll survive yours. Each item she packed represented her determination to reclaim control, the self she'd been before both catastrophic relationships, the artist who had once stood on her own talent rather than leaning on powerful men who ultimately betrayed her. The wedding ring, simple gold band chosen in haste, she placed deliberately on the nightstand. Its soft clink against marble echoed with finality. Call your driver or I'll call a cab, she said, voice steady despite the storm of emotions beneath the surface. I won't spend another night in this place. Her phone rang, Natalie, as though somehow sensing her sister's crisis. Olivia answered immediately. Can I stay with you tonight? I need to leave. Now. Of course, came the immediate response. What happened? I'll explain when I get there. I just need to get out. As Olivia gathered her final belongings, Jackson blocked the bedroom doorway, not physically preventing her exit, but positioning himself where she couldn't avoid him. Please, he said, voice stripped of its usual confidence. Give me 5 minutes before you decide. There's nothing to decide. Your family targeted me as part of a business acquisition. Whether you were complicit or clueless doesn't change what happened. That's not true. Meeting you was genuine, completely unplanned. His eyes held desperate sincerity. Yes, Father kept me in the dark about Porter Gallery. Yes, I should have told you immediately when I discovered the connection. Those are my failures. But our meeting, our connection, that was real. He stepped aside, giving her clear path to leave. I'm not asking you to stay. I'm asking for 5 minutes to show you something before you go. Something in his expression, raw vulnerability rather than calculated charm, made Olivia hesitate. 5 minutes, she agreed coldly. Jackson led her to his office, unlocking a drawer she'd never seen opened. From it, he withdrew a file labeled Porter Gallery Assessment with a cover page dated 3 months earlier. This is the preliminary financial review I conducted before we met. Read the recommendation on page 4. Olivia scanned the document, finding Jackson's signature above a clear recommendation: acquisition inadvisable due to pending litigation and questionable business practices. Recommend against proceeding. My dear family, I know you're feeling the tension between Olivia and Jackson, but before we continue, I want to ask you pause and ask you. What would you do if you were in Olivia's position? Would you stay to hear Jackson's explanation or leave immediately? Tell me what you'd do in the comments. I'm dying to know whether you think she should trust him one more time or protect her heart by walking away. While you're sharing your thoughts, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on. Our story family is growing every day, and we'd like you to join us. Your support means everything. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. Now let's continue. I had no idea about the acquisition until 3 weeks ago, Jackson explained, spreading additional documents across his desk. These are the board minutes. Look at the attendees list, my name isn't there. Father deliberately excluded me from all Porter Gallery discussions. Olivia scanned the papers, noting Raymond's careful maneuvering to keep certain board members, particularly Jackson, away from key meetings. When I submitted my negative assessment, Jackson continued. Father thanked me, said he'd consider my recommendation, then quietly moved discussions to a special committee I wasn't part of. He waited until preliminary agreements were signed before informing me. He pulled out his phone, showing Olivia his calendar. This meeting, 2 weeks ago, that's when I first learned they'd proceeded despite my recommendation. I confronted Father immediately. Why didn't you tell me then? Olivia demanded, her voice still hard with suspicion. Because I was trying to stop it. Jackson ran his hands through his hair in frustration. I thought I could handle it internally, protect you from more trauma while I worked to convince Father to back out. You should have told me regardless. You're right. I was wrong. Jackson's admission held no excuses or qualifications. I wanted to shield you, but I ended up breaking your trust instead. That's on me, completely. But our meeting, our connection, that had nothing to do with Porter Gallery. Father's actions came after we were already married. The day I discovered what Father had done, I went directly to his office. Jackson continued, pulling out his phone again and showing Olivia a series of increasingly urgent text messages between them. Raymond wouldn't take my calls for 2 days. When I finally cornered him at the office, it was all intense. Jackson's expression darkened with the memory. I told him he had 24 hours to terminate the acquisition negotiations, or I would personally call every board member and explain how he had deliberately concealed relevant information about pending litigation. What did he say? Olivia asked, her anger temporarily suspended by curiosity. He claimed he was protecting the family interests and accused me of letting personal feelings cloud my business judgment. When I pointed out the lawsuit made the acquisition legally problematic, he actually laughed. Jackson's jaw tightened. That's when he informed me the family had thoroughly investigated you after our courthouse wedding. He had a complete dossier, your financials, career history, family background, even documentation about your lawsuit against Porter. He investigated me? Olivia felt violated all over again. Standard procedure for anyone attempting to access Blackwood resources, according to father. Jackson's disgust was evident. As though our marriage were nothing but an elaborate con targeting family assets. The confrontation ended with him telling me to grow up and recognize manipulation when I see it. He genuinely believes you married me to gain leverage over Porter Gallery. Father had someone following you in Connecticut, Jackson revealed, his voice tight with controlled anger. From the moment we were seen together at the coffee shop. Olivia felt her skin crawl. He had me followed? Not just followed, investigated thoroughly. Your parents' careers and finances. Your sister's law practice. Your previous relationships. Every gallery that's shown your work. Jackson opened another file, revealing surveillance photos, Olivia entering her parents' home, sketching in the garage studio, even walking with Jackson along the harbor. When I discovered these, I nearly... Jackson stopped himself. He justified it as a standard due diligence for anyone joining the family. He actually seemed proud of his thoroughness. The invasion felt profound, strangers documenting her most vulnerable period, reporting her movements, investigating her family while she'd been unaware. And the Porter Gallery connection? Olivia asked. That was the crown jewel of his investigation. When he realized you were suing the company he was quietly acquiring, he saw it as confirmation you were targeting me for strategic reasons. My family has a particular lens through which they view my relationships, Jackson explained bitterly. 3 months before we met, I ended things with a woman they strongly approved of, Nicole Whitcomb, impeccable background, suitable connections. My mother still mentions her regularly. He paced the room, unable to contain his agitation. After that breakup, father and mother became convinced I needed a protection from myself. Their words, not mine. Protection from what? Olivia asked. From women they believe target me for financial gain. In their worldview, anyone outside our social circle who shows interest in me must have ulterior motives. Jackson's expression reflected decades of accumulated frustration. When I suddenly married someone they hadn't vetted, an artist with an ongoing lawsuit against a company they were acquiring, it triggered every protective instinct they possess. So they assumed I was after your money. They constructed an entire narrative where you'd somehow learned about the Porter acquisition and strategically positioned yourself to either gain insider information for your lawsuit or secure a settlement through marriage. The absurdity might have been laughable if it weren't so painful. Their genuine connection, their impulsive but real feelings, reduced to calculated strategy by people who measured all relationships in terms of advantage and asset protection. Victoria called it my most dangerous infatuation yet, and warned that you were clearly more sophisticated than previous fortune hunters. Jackson's voice cracked with hurt. They never considered the possibility that two people might simply connect authentically. Truth is, the morning before the gala, Jackson stood in his father's wood-paneled study, facing his parents across the massive oak desk that had intimidated him since childhood. Victoria perched on a leather armchair, while Raymond remained standing, using his height advantage as he always did during confrontations. "This stops now," Jackson stated, placing the surveillance photos of Olivia on the desk. "The investigations, the interference, the acquisition of Porter Gallery, all of it." "You're being emotional, son," Raymond replied dismissively. "These are standard business procedures." "Having my wife followed is not a business procedure," Jackson countered, his voice steady. "It's an invasion of privacy and a betrayal of trust." Victoria leaned forward. "Darling, we're simply looking out for your interests." "This hasty marriage is my choice," Jackson interrupted, something he'd never done to his mother before. "My marriage. My life. Not a business transaction requiring your approval." Raymond's face hardened. "You've never understood what it takes to protect this family's legacy. Sometimes difficult decisions." "Don't lecture me about the family legacy," Jackson cut in. "I've compromised my dreams, my identity, my authentic self for that legacy my entire life. No more." "What exactly are you saying?" Raymond's voice dropped dangerously. Jackson met his father's gaze without flinching. "I'm saying that if you proceed with the Porter Gallery acquisition, if you continue investigating or undermining my wife, I will withdraw completely from Blackwood Industries and the Foundation." The threat landed like a physical blow. Victoria gasped while Raymond's face flushed deep red. "You would throw away generations of—" "I'm not throwing away anything," Jackson stated firmly. "I'm finally claiming my own life. The choice is yours: respect my marriage and my boundaries, or lose me completely from the family business." "You can't be serious," Thomas said from the doorway, having entered midway through the confrontation. "You'd walk away from everything over this situation?" Jackson turned to face his brother. "This situation is my marriage. And yes, I'm entirely serious." Raymond circled the desk, his expression calculating. "Be reasonable, Jackson. Your trust fund provisions, your position at the foundation, your equity stakes, all contingent on active participation in family interests." "I'm well aware of the financial implications," Jackson replied calmly. "I've already spoken with my own attorneys." Victoria rose from her chair, alarm evident in her usually composed features. "You would choose financial ruin over family loyalty?" "I would choose integrity over manipulation," Jackson corrected. "My architectural firm is successful independently. Olivia and I don't need Blackwood millions to live meaningful lives." Raymond studied his son with newfound wariness. "You've never stood your ground before." "Not like this." "Because I've never had something this important to stand for," Jackson answered simply. "I love her. Either you accept that and welcome her genuinely, or I walk away. No negotiations. No compromises." Back in their penthouse, the early morning hours found Jackson and Olivia sitting on opposite ends of the sofa, the physical distance between them reflecting their emotional uncertainty. Her packed bags remained by the door, a reminder that reconciliation wasn't guaranteed. "I need to know everything," Olivia said quietly. "No more protected truths, no more shielding me from realities you think I can't handle." Jackson nodded. "Complete honesty, even when it's difficult." "Why didn't you tell me about Porter Gallery the moment you found out?" "Because I was ashamed," he admitted. Ashamed that my family would stoop to something so calculating. Afraid you'd believe I was part of it. Terrified of losing what we'd finally started building. That decision wasn't yours to make, Olivia said, her voice tight with hurt. You kept information from me that directly affected my life, my lawsuit, my career. You're right. I was wrong. Jackson's acknowledgement held no qualifications. I've spent my entire life in a family where information is currency, shared strategically, withheld tactically. I fell back into those patterns, trying to protect you while I fixed it behind the scenes. That's exactly what Michael did, decided what I needed to know based on what he thought I could handle. I know. Jackson's voice broke slightly. The irony is crushing. I became exactly what I despise, what hurt you before. There's no excuse for that betrayal of trust. Olivia studied him, searching for any hint of calculation or manipulation. How do I know this isn't just another performance? Jackson's carefully maintained composure finally crumbled. His shoulders slumped as he looked down at his hands. Partially sobbing, he spoke. My entire life, I've never been sure if people wanted me or what I represent, he confessed, voice barely above a whisper. The Blackwood name, the connections, the wealth, they've always overshadowed the actual person. His eyes, when he raised them to meet hers, held raw vulnerability. When we met in that coffee shop, you had no idea who I was. Your response to me felt pure, uncontaminated by calculation or agenda. For the first time, I believed someone might actually see me, just me. A single tear tracked down his cheek, which he brushed away with embarrassment. My deepest fear has always been that I'm unlovable, separated from what I can provide. That without the Blackwood fortune and influence, I'd be invisible. Unwanted. That fear drove me to hide things I should have shared, to protect what felt like my one chance at being truly known. After Michael, Olivia began, her voice unsteady, I swore I'd never let anyone close enough to hurt me again. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was total. My relationship, my career, my financial security, my home, everything collapsed simultaneously. She pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller on the sofa. When I met you, it felt like the universe offering an impossible second chance. Too perfect, too convenient. Part of me has been waiting for the other shoe to drop since our first date. Olivia wiped away tears with the back of her hand. I rushed into marriage with you partly because I wanted to believe in magic again, in connection that transcends logic. But I've also been terrified every single day that I made another catastrophic mistake. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. The thought of being hurt like that again, of having my heart shattered a second time, it paralyzes me. Sometimes I catch myself already planning my escape route, just in case. That's the truth I've been hiding. As dawn light began filtering through the windows, Olivia and Jackson sat in silence, their shared vulnerability creating a different kind of intimacy than they'd experienced before. The truth, painful, messy, frightening, lay exposed between them. Where do we go from here? Jackson finally asked. Olivia looked toward her packed bags by the door, then back to Jackson. I don't know. What do you want, Olivia? Not what makes logical sense. Not what protects you from pain. What do you actually want? The question hung in the air, demanding an honesty she'd been avoiding. I want. She began hesitantly, I want to believe that something real can grow from our imperfect beginning. I want to trust again, even though it terrifies me. Jackson moved slightly closer on the sofa. I want that too. But wanting isn't enough, Olivia continued. Trust requires action, consistency, transparency. It means choosing vulnerability when every instinct screams for self-protection. I know I've broken your trust, Jackson acknowledged. I can't undo that. I can only ask for the chance to rebuild it, day by day. Olivia studied him, the man she'd married impulsively, discovered gradually, and now faced honestly. I could leave, she said softly. Part of me wants to. The scared part. The part that says running is safer than risking more pain. And the other part? Jackson asked. The other part remembers how it felt in your studio when we truly saw each other. How it feels when we connect authentically. That part believes some risks are worth taking. In the quiet morning light, Olivia made her choice, not from naivety or desperation, but from courage. I want to stay. To try. To choose trust over fear, however difficult that path might be. As long as we do it together, she said as both of them drew into a hug that felt like eternity. 1 year later, the converted warehouse in Boston's Fort Point district hummed with creative energy. Sunlight streamed through the industrial windows, illuminating dozens of artists working at communal tables, individual stations, and specialized equipment areas. The new printmaking press arrived, Olivia announced, entering the administrative office where Jackson was reviewing grant applications. The instructor says, we can start the advanced classes next month. The Fort Point Community Art Center had evolved from tentative idea to thriving reality over the past 8 months. What began as Olivia and Jackson's shared dream, a space where artists of all backgrounds could access professional equipment, instruction, and community, had quickly become one of Boston's most vibrant creative hubs. The waiting list keeps growing, Jackson noted, showing Olivia the latest registration numbers. We may need to consider expanding sooner than we planned. They moved through the center together, stopping to chat with a teenage girl experimenting with mixed media, an elderly man developing film in the darkroom they'd painstakingly built, a group of immigrants creating art that reflected their complex journeys. Unlike the exclusive galleries of Olivia's past or the elite architectural circles of Jackson's former world, the center welcomed everyone, established professionals seeking community, beginners discovering their voices, children exploring creative expression for the first time. Membership fees operated on a sliding scale, ensuring accessibility regardless of economic circumstance. Mrs. Perez finished her mural, Olivia said, guiding Jackson toward the community exhibition space where a 70-year-old woman proudly displayed her first completed artwork. 6 blocks from the art center, Olivia and Jackson had created a home that reflected their shared values rather than status or tradition. The converted industrial loft, all exposed brick, weathered wooden beams, and massive factory windows, occupied the top floor of a historic textile building. Unlike the sterile luxury of the Blackwood penthouse, their space vibrated with creative energy and personal meaning. Furniture combined flea market finds with custom pieces Jackson had designed. Art covered the walls, not investment pieces, but works they loved, many created by friends or center members. The open kitchen, where they now prepared meals together rather than relying on staff, featured well-used equipment and herbs growing in window boxes. Their shared studio occupied the brightest corner, 2 easels positioned to catch optimal light while allowing conversation during parallel creative sessions. It wasn't grand or impressive by Blackwood standards. The floors creaked. Winter drafts required extra sweaters. The neighborhood remained in transition. But within these imperfect walls, they built something neither had experienced before, a home that reflected their authentic selves rather than external expectations. After the confrontation with his family, Jackson had negotiated a compromise that preserved relationships while protecting his autonomy. He maintained a seat on the Blackwood Foundation board, focusing its philanthropy increasingly toward arts education, while stepping back from day-to-day business operations. The settlement included relinquishing certain trust fund privileges in exchange for independence. The financial adjustment had been significant but liberating. Most importantly, Jackson had reclaimed his first love, painting. 3 mornings weekly, before the center opened to members, he worked on canvases that had recently caught the attention of a respected gallery owner. "It's different, creating without hiding," he admitted to Olivia one evening as they discussed his upcoming first exhibition, a modest showing under his own name rather than a pseudonym. Raymond and Victoria had attended the center's opening gala, their relationship with Jackson gradually healing through his newfound confidence and boundary setting. Though they didn't fully understand his choices, they had begun to respect the man who had finally defined himself beyond the Blackwood legacy. Olivia's work had transformed through her journey, evolving from the raw, wounded expressions of betrayal to more nuanced explorations of identity, connection, and resilience. Her new series, Transitions, had garnered attention from critics who praised its unflinching honesty and sophisticated emotional depth. The lawsuit against Porter Gallery had settled favorably after Blackwood Industries withdrew from the acquisition, allowing Olivia to reclaim not just financial compensation but professional dignity. More importantly, the resolution had freed her creatively, releasing her from the weight of anger that had constrained her expression. "I'm painting from wholeness now, not from brokenness," she explained to a journalist interviewing her for a feature in American Artist magazine. "The work feels different because I'm different." Her studio practice had found healthy balance, disciplined without being consuming, passionate without being desperate. She created now from choice rather than compulsion, each canvas reflecting a woman who had reclaimed her voice and discovered new dimensions to her artistic vision. Most satisfying was teaching weekly master classes at the center, mentoring emerging artists with the wisdom her difficult journey had provided. What had begun as an impulsive union now rested on a foundation built deliberately, day by day. Jackson and Olivia had developed rituals that sustained their connection: Sunday morning coffee on their roof deck, weekly studio dates where they painted side by side in comfortable silence, monthly technology-free weekends exploring coastal New England towns. The difference, Olivia reflected during their first anniversary dinner, is that we chose each other consciously this time. Not from impulse or escape, but with full awareness of both our strengths and limitations. Their relationship had weathered significant challenges, strained family dynamics, professional reinvention, financial adjustment, trust rebuilding, emerging stronger through honest communication rather than avoidance. They'd learned to recognize warning signs in each other. When Jackson grew quiet and distant, retreating into people-pleasing patterns from his childhood, Olivia gently called him back to authenticity. When Olivia built protective walls during vulnerable moments, Jackson patiently created space for her emotions without pressure or judgment. "We're not perfect," Jackson acknowledged, reaching for her hand across their kitchen table. "But we're perfectly honest about our imperfections." The passion between them had deepened with growing trust. Physical intimacy now carried the weight of emotional connection, desire strengthened by genuine knowledge of each other, by wounds revealed and accepted, by conscious choice rather than desperate grasping. What they built wasn't a fairy tale ending, but something far more valuable, a relationship grounded in reality yet still containing magic, practical in its foundations yet deeply romantic in its daily expressions. On a crisp autumn morning, Olivia sat in their rooftop garden, sketchbook open but momentarily forgotten as she gazed across Boston's skyline. Jackson joined her, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "Tea for you," he said, offering her the herbal blend she'd switched to recently. "How are you feeling this morning?" Olivia accepted the mug with a soft smile. "Better. The nausea seems to be fading." 12 weeks into pregnancy, they were still adjusting to the news that had surprised them both, a development neither had planned yet both had welcomed with cautious joy. "Dr. Winters called with the test results," Olivia said, reaching for Jackson's hand. "Everything looks perfect." Jackson settled beside her on the bench, his expression a mixture of wonder and nervous excitement. "I still can't believe we're going to be parents." "Terrified?" she asked with gentle understanding. "Completely," he admitted. "But in the best possible way." The baby represented more than a physical creation. It symbolized their shared belief in possibilities, in futures built on hope rather than fear, in family bonds created through choice rather than obligation. Their journey had taught them lessons neither could have learned through caution alone. That sometimes the greatest risks yield the most profound rewards. That authentic love requires seeing and being seen completely, flaws, wounds, and all. That predetermined paths rarely lead to genuine fulfillment. "We had to break everything down to build something real," Olivia observed one evening as they reviewed architectural plans for the center's expansion. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "The irony is that by abandoning what seemed secure, your career trajectory, my family position, we found actual security." They discovered that true safety comes not from external validation or carefully managed appearances, but from creating a life aligned with core values, from relationships built on honesty rather than convenience, from the courage to define success in deeply personal terms. My beautiful story family, as we reach the end of Olivia and Jackson's journey, I'm reminded that life's most meaningful chapters often begin with moments of beautiful recklessness. Those split-second decisions that seem crazy to everyone else, but somehow feel right in our souls. What transforms an impulsive choice into lasting happiness isn't the initial leap, it's the daily commitment to building something real from that spontaneous beginning. It's the willingness to face hard truths, to grow through challenges, to choose love repeatedly even when it would be easier to walk away. Sometimes our hearts recognize truth faster than our minds can process it. The key is having the courage to nurture that truth into something lasting and beautiful. Your incredible responses to this story have shown me how many of you have experienced similar moments, times when following your heart led you to unexpected joy. Life's greatest love stories rarely follow a predictable script. They're messy, surprising, and sometimes require a leap of faith. But when we're brave enough to stay and do the work, magic happens. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. Thank you for being part of our growing community. Your comments, your shares, your emotional connections to these stories mean everything to me. Until our next journey together, keep believing in love that defies logic, in second chances, and in the power of following your heart. Drop a heart in the comments if you believe in love that breaks all the rules, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new here. I'll see you all in our next story adventure.